Hello knitters, I'm Merion from Love Crafts. I'm going to show you how to knit in the round and more importantly how to join your knitting in the round. Now we knit in the round when we want to knit in a circle. So if you're going to make a jumper, a sweater or a sleeve or a sock, sometimes it's really lovely not to knit in pieces and then have to do the seaming, but to knit something in one piece without any seams to sew. If you don't like seaming, knitting in the round is perfect for you. Let's have a look at this. What I've done is I've just cast on my stitches as normal. So just pretend while you're casting them on, this is just two separate needles and cast on in exactly the same way as you would. It doesn't matter what kind of cast on, just use your regular cast on. So we've got all of the stitches sitting on the cable all the way around. And the first thing that you must do if you're going to knit in the round and join them up in the round is to make sure that all the stitches are facing the same way so that you haven't got a twist. So just looking here, a good way to do this is just to lie the needle down flat and make sure that the cast on edge, which is here, is pointing forwards. So just make sure it's all sitting forwards like that around. So when I mean if you've got a twist, if something happens like that, where you've got this happening, where you've got sort of some of the cast on edges facing the right way and some of them not, and then you join up, you're going to have problems later on because you're going to have a twist in your knitting. So it's very important, make sure that all of the cast on edges, all the way around, are facing inside. You know, when you've done this a few times, it'll be second nature, but just for the first few times, make sure that you're not twisted. So then pick up the edge of the needle, the end that you're working with, the one that you've been casting on with. And you're going to use the working yarn. So this is the one that's connected to the ball, not your little tail here, this one here. So I'm going to pick up both needles and then keep that little tail edge out the way. Using your working yarn, the one that's connected to the ball, we're just going to knit into the first stitch you cast on, the very first one, which is on the left-hand needle. So just knit as normal, put the needle in. What you do want to make sure, so that you don't get a big gap here, is that you keep the tension quite tight just for this first stitch. So we knit just in exactly the normal way, knit the first stitch there. So you see there's my first knitted stitch. Now I'm going to carry on knitting the next stitch, keeping the tension quite tight here just for the first few stitches, first of row, to make sure that you're not going to have a gap. So let's have a look. Here's where you joined with the first few stitches. There's your tail, but these are joined up. So what you could do if you're working on something, you could put a stitch marker in here and that'll show you the beginning of your round. When we work in knitting in the round and circular knitting, we talk about rounds rather than rows. So you could put a marker here just to show you where the beginning of the round is. And you often see that listed in a pattern as BOR, beginning of round. So I'm just going to keep knitting just in the normal way. And at some point you'll find, as you keep going, that suddenly your stitches seem a bit spread out. And that's because normally, if you had straight needles, you'd be moving the stitches around, but let's look here. Oopsie, split the yarn. We've got some bunched up stitches on this needle and everything's a bit stretched out. Don't be frightened about that. Just move the stitches round as if you're on two needles, just behave in exactly the same way. You're just knitting in a circle. So I'm going to carry on knitting round here. And we'll do that again. Now I'm going to carry on knitting and I'm going to meet you back here when I get back to the beginning. 3. Now here's that last stitch of the round, and again, because we're going over this bump, after this row, it won't matter so much, but as you go after this bump, just make sure you keep your working yarn nice and taut. Not tight, but just nice and sort of taut, so that we go round here and we don't end up with a gap. If you knit round here and you have a very sort of loose washing line over here, you could end up with a little bit of a gap. So I'm going to knit that last stitch, and there's the gap, there's their little tail. Just carry on. No need to do anything else, just carry on knitting. So I'm coming round now onto these stitches, and you will find that with the second row, and as we sort of work on, it will loosen up. Sometimes it's it's quite tight, like the first row of any sort of knitting might be a little bit tight, but you can see here the second row emerging. You can see the little knit stitches on this side and purl on the back there. When you work in the round, the other very lovely thing about it is if you're knitting something in stocking stitch, there's no purling involved. So if you don't like doing a purl stitch, knit in the round. So there we go. And then you just keep going. And if you've got a stitch marker, just move it each time you come round, move the stitch marker up one so that you know which round you're on. And that is how you knit in the round. So now you can knit in the round. I hope that's been helpful. So the next part of your knitting journey is to learn new stitches or increases or decreases. So click the next video and I'll see you there.